Welcome back to another episode of Barbecue in Bottles. And on today's brisket experiment, we're going to be injecting one of these briskets with beef broth, and the other one we'll just do our traditional Central Texas preparation method. And we're going to see if that makes a difference. Now, I'm mostly interested to see if it makes a difference in how juicy it is, the flavor profile. I doubt there'll be any kind of difference in the bark formation or the smoke ring, but you never know. So those are the dimensions we're going to compare these two briskets against. So if you're into that kind of thing, stick with us. Now I know these brisket videos are really long, so if you want to skip to just the trim, the cook, the actual final results, we've got timestamps over here for different parts of the video if you just want to skip ahead. So we've got two full packer briskets here. Both of these are about 14-15 pounds. And when we look at them, the reason I think these are great briskets is one, I know the butcher and I know where the meat's coming from and it's sourced from a local farm here in Southern Ontario. But secondly, when you actually look at your brisket, we've got a thick flat over here. The point's where all the fat is, and then on the flat, it's a little bit thinner, and sometimes the flats end up being too thin. And if you get a flat that's too thin, it can burn, or by the time the flat's cooked, the point still has a ways to go. And so getting a brisket that's a little bit more even thickness all the way through, that should help with our cook. But enough of the jibber jabber here, let's just get cutting into these. So we'll take our knife, and we're using a boning knife here, as we always do. And you'll just slice an opening in the brisket package like that. And that's because you want to keep as much of the void on the inside of the bag as opposed to your cutting board. So we usually just grab this decal here, pull it out. Perfect. Now this one wasn't too juicy, but you can see here we kept all that juice just down in the bag. And that's just a nice little secret to keep it all in the bag, no mess, no fuss. So now we're just gonna get a little paper towel, pat this dry, flip it over. Perfect. Now the first cut I like to make is just along this edge here. You can see part of this edge is just browned up, and that's because of the oxidization at the abattoir. So this side of the steer would have been exposed to the air, and that all just oxidized, and that's why it's brown. So we're gonna come down the side here. We'll get a little bowl just for all of our trimmings to go into. And you can see here, like the real difference between the redness here and how brown it is. And that's what we're really trying to expose, just some of the fresh protein on the inside. So don't throw away your trimmings. You can use these either to blend in with other chuck as part of making hamburger meat, or we've also got a video here where we made beef tallow out of it, and that's a great substitute for butter. Or if you're deep frying, it's a great substitute for canola oil. I'm gonna flip it over just quickly, and we're gonna take off the decal. That's this really tough white piece of fat here. This is exceptionally hard fat that's not gonna render down over the course of a low and slow cook. And you certainly don't wanna be cutting into this and serving somebody a slice of brisket that has part of the decal fat in it. Now we've got a little bit of silver skin and fat here on the back of this brisket. So we're just gonna get in under that, trim some of this off. Now you don't have to do this perfectly. It's backyard barbecue after all. This silver skin, you know, it's not gonna make a huge difference, but if you've got the time, just pull it off, pull off this fat. Now we're gonna switch back to the fat cap. We're gonna wanna take off any excess fat here and leave at least 1/4 of an inch thick worth of fat. And that's just gonna help protect the brisket through the cook from the heat source. And of course, we're gonna try and get off any of these little hanger-oners here. These flaps of beef, they're just gonna end up burning away over the course of a cook. Now I always remind myself when you're trimming up the fat cap like this, that it's great to have cold brisket that's come straight out of the fridge. It just makes trimming the fat cap that much easier. And the fat's a little bit harder, it makes it a little easier for your knife to actually go through the fat. It just helps avoid the knife slipping and you hurting yourself. This brisket had a fairly thin fat cap from the outset, so I'm not gonna do too much trimming off of here. I've just cleaned it up a little bit. But now, again, we're gonna round out the edges. So we're just gonna take our knife here, and this is just gonna help ensure smooth smoke flow around our brisket, and that we don't end up with any burnt pieces. And then I think we're done with this guy. All right, so we've got our trimmed up brisket. We're gonna go ahead, trim up our second brisket the same way, and then we'll bring you back for the seasoning and the brining of one of these guys. So now for the injection. We're just using a regular beef broth here. We'll get this opened up, and we're trying to inject about 15 ounces of beef broth, which is about half of this container, or about 450 milliliters for those of us who are not American. So we're just gonna pull this up. So we're gonna be taking our needle and we're gonna be injecting it about every inch throughout the whole brisket. And we're gonna be injecting about half an ounce worth of the beef broth with every squeeze here. Now you can see as we push in, the broth actually fills up the brisket. And as a consequence, you might want to end up doing this in one of those large foil pans that could just prevent some dripping, where the beef broth, it's inevitably going to come out of the brisket here, and a foil pan will just keep it all in one place, make less of a mess. So I think we've got enough of the beef broth injected here. So now we're gonna move over to the seasoning. So for the seasoning, we're gonna keep this real simple. We're just gonna use coarse ground black pepper. So it's gonna be 2 parts coarse ground black pepper to 1 part kosher salt. And this is a heavy pepper rub. That's a Central Texas style. That's really what we're going for here. We want that rich, dark black bark, and the pepper really helps us accomplish that. Now you can add other things in here like brown sugar, paprika for color, but we're, again, keeping it pretty simple and straightforward here. All right, take a sip of coffee. And now we're gonna grab a handful of our rub and just start sprinkling from high up. When you sprinkle your rub over your brisket, you wanna go from high up, because as the seasoning actually falls, or the rub falls, it'll just fall more evenly across the whole brisket. We'll do the same thing over here. Don't worry if you're not getting all of it onto the brisket. You'll inevitably get some on the cutting board or the surface that you're seasoning your brisket on. Flip these over. Get the other side. All right, now let's make sure we get the edges. So now let's pat this in. And of course, to get the edges, you can always lift your brisket up, get some of that excess that's hit the sides under this flap here. We want to make sure that gets seasoned up. All right, now we'll do the same over here, get the sides. Beauty. Now that we've got these guys seasoned up, we're gonna fire up the pellet grill, get them on. Now for the first part of our cook, we're gonna be going nice and low and slow. So we're gonna set it to 225. We'll get the grill open. We've got some fresh foil down on our grease trap here. So we're gonna get these guys on the grill and fat cap down. Now the reason we're going fat cap down is because the heat source from this pellet grill comes up from the bottom. And so we want that fat cap to just protect the actual protein from drying out or just taking too much heat. It'll act as a bit of a shield for us. So we've got 2 built-in temp probes here. So we're gonna put these into the flat side of the brisket, and we're just poking that into the center of the flat. We'll do the same with our other brisket. Perfect. Now I'll get the lid down here in a second, and these guys are ready to cook. Now when you're planning your brisket cooks, you want to be planning for somewhere between an hour to an hour and a half per pound of brisket. So these are done really low and slow. As we mentioned, we've got the grill set to 225. So we're just going to let these go for 90 minutes before we do our first check on them, and then we'll start spritzing them. And for those who said pellet smokers don't generate enough smoke, just check this out. So we're just going to check and make sure we've got a full hopper of pellets here. We're pretty good, but we could top this up a little bit. We've got the Cuisinart cherry rum pellets. and these are made from real rum barrels. So there's a really nice smoky profile to these. It has hints of that rum. Perfect. And this is a 30-pound hopper, so that'll be loads for this cook. So what's great about this grill is you can just connect into the app here, and this will let you actually monitor the temps. You can see the temps of either of the probes here, and you can even set desired temps, so there'll be alarms when you hit certain temperature readings. So you can set manual temperature here, come across. We're ultimately gonna be looking for a cook at 198, but we'll start monitoring at 195. So we'll do the same for the second brisket, 195. So at 195, we'll start probing to see whether it's probe tender or not. And that's how this little app works. So you can come in here. As time passes, you can see how the temperature readings on the probe actually changes relative to your target temp here. So it's a pretty cool little feature, and just lets you see how your cook's been progressing, and you can hang out inside and monitor your cook indoors as opposed to just having to be out by your grill. So we're just gonna check in on the briskets here. Now you can see we've already started to get a really nice red mahogany color from the smoke on these guys. So we've just got a little bit of our spray here, and this is a mix of apple cider vinegar and then an equivalent amount of water, so 1-to-1 ratio diluted apple cider vinegar. And we're just gonna spray these guys down here, and this will help ensure that we still have really nice juicy briskets as opposed to drying them out. So I'll hit them on that side, and then we'll come in from the back as well. So we're 90 minutes in. Our briskets are at about 135 to 140 internal temp. So at this point, we're just gonna spritz these every 30 to 60 minutes over the rest of this cook until we hit the stall, and that's the point in which we'll wrap. We're gonna check in on these guys again. We're at an internal temp of 145 to 150 right now. Oh, beautiful. Those guys are looking great. Look at that bark. Really nice, rich mahogany color. Now, let's spritz. So now if you look at both of these, you don't see any pooling on the flat. Sometimes you'll get liquid that will pool on the flat, and that'll just make it really tough for the bark to actually get crusty and form that black exterior that we're looking for in these briskets. So we're in pretty good shape here on both of these. If you do find yourself in a situation where you've got some pooling of the renderings that are coming out of the brisket, just crumple up a little bit of tin foil, stick it under the flat, and that'll just prop it up and let the moisture roll off the brisket. And of course, Delilah's come over because we're cooking brisket. No, I don't have any brisket for you yet. Still a few hours to go, Delilah. We're getting ready to wrap. These briskets have been at 165 for about the last hour, so they're pretty much all the way through the stall at this point. So we're gonna get the other one, we'll show you how to wrap them up. So this is the brisket that was injected. This is the one that wasn't. And to be honest, at this point, I can't tell a ton of difference. Maybe this one's a little bit plumper, but not that big of a deal. So we're just gonna wrap these up. We're going in pink butcher's paper. Now the reason we're using butcher's paper is it's a little bit more breathable than foil. When you're using foil, you just get a ton of steam that's really captured in that foil, and it's almost like you're braising the brisket over the last bit of the cook. So now with this, we've got a little bit more of a breathable membrane so that steam can escape. So now we're gonna get these back onto the grill. So we're just putting the briskets back on the grill here, and we're going fat tap side up. Now we're gonna put the temp probes back into the flat. and we took these off around 165, so you'll know that you're putting the temp probe back in the same place in the flat if it's registering 165 when you put it back in. So now we're just gonna let this go probably another 3 or 4 hours until we hit a final temp of 195. So while we're smoking these briskets, we threw some chicken down on the grill, and I want to show you the crust. Just look at this. Absolutely incredible. These were just down on the smoker, skin side down, salt, pepper, garlic, and we were just using up a little bit of extra real estate that we had on the grill. I just love doing that. You know, if you've got some extra space, you're going to be burning the pellets anyway. Why not cook up a few extra things, throw them in the fridge, you can eat them later in the week. Just a little tip for you in case, you know, if you were just doing one brisket, you got a ton of extra room here. Now we're up to 203, so we're gonna check for doneness. So we're coming in here, and for it to be probe tender, you really want no resistance. You want this probe just to slip down into the point with very little resistance. This is starting to feel much better. So I'm gonna give this another 2 minutes, and then we're gonna get it into the cooler. Let's get this guy into the cooler now. Beauty, just like that. Now we'll let him rest in there for probably 90 minutes before we carve into him, and that's just gonna allow the muscle to relax again, the moisture to redistribute, the juice to redistribute throughout the brisket, just so we get that really nice and juicy brisket when we carve into it. All right, our second brisket's registered 198 here. So we're gonna check if the point's probe tender. Oh yeah, look at that, just like butter. Wow, that's perfect. Okay, we're gonna get this into the cooler now. Just look at that, it's got a really nice bend to it. Get that down in the cooler. We've probably got another 60 minutes to go on these briskets. The first one was taken off about a half an hour earlier. So we'll let these rest again for another 60 minutes and then we'll carve into them. All right, we've had these briskets resting for 90 minutes now. So we're gonna pull them out. First one here, this is the one that we hadn't injected. And this is the one that this is the one that we did inject. Now I want to show you just how much juice is left over in the bottom of your cooler. So that's juice that's just relaxed out of the briskets while they've been sitting there for the last 90 minutes. So now we're gonna get these bad boys out of their packaging. Beautiful. Just pull this out of the butcher's paper here. And while you're doing this, it's great to have an apron on because I'm telling you, these things are so juicy. It's gonna be next to impossible not to get yourself dirty. Just look at that guy. So the first thing we're gonna check out here is just look at how much juice is actually in the butcher's paper here. In this one, it's a lot drier. So I think that's a bit of an indication that this may end up being the juicier brisket. I mean, looking at the exterior, it doesn't look like there's that much difference in terms of the moisture content. And if you shake the table here, we're getting a good jiggle on that one. We're getting a good jiggle on this one as well. But this one might be a little bit better of a jiggle. You never know, but we'll see when we slice into these guys just how things turned out. All right, so let's get the butcher's paper out of the way. Just look at that drip. And we get this butcher's paper out of the way. Now the first thing we're gonna do, we're just gonna carve about 2/3 up the brisket between the flat and the point. We'll just check out that. Wow. Incredibly moist. Now we'll do the same on this brisket, just compare the two. Look at that one as well. That's no less juicy, I'm here to tell you. Look at that. Incredible how much rendering is coming out of it. So we've got the muscle fibers on the flat moving this way, so we're gonna wanna cut against the grain. So we're first just gonna take off the tip here, and we'll cut that into large chunks. These are beautiful morsels. And we're just gonna slice in. And as we're carving brisket slices off of the flat here, we're aiming for slices that are about a pencil width thick. A little cheat for the pros here is if you've overdone your brisket, then you want to cut your slices a little bit thicker. If you've underdone your brisket, then you cut them thinner. So these guys, just look at that. Beautiful, really nice and tender. It's passing the clap test here. Oh, and it broke. So there you go. This shouldn't have broke. That would suggest that we've maybe overdone this a little bit, which I'm surprised about given this is the one that we took off at the outset. So now we're gonna carve down the point, and for the point, the muscle fibers run in the opposite direction, and so that's why we turn it and we carve it the other way. Just look at how juicy this guy is. Okay, so now we're gonna carve thick slices here. This is where the higher fat content in the brisket is. So these are gonna be gorgeous slices. Just look at that. Now we've got the muscle fibers running this way on this flat. So we'll cut this off. Now we'll start carving in slices here as well. So we're just doing the clap test here to make sure that the brisket's tender enough that it hangs over the slicer, but it's not overdone to the point where it breaks. So this guy right here, passing the clap test. Now we'll slice into the point. All right, now we're gonna carve into the point. Just looking at this guy, beautiful slice right there. Nothing to complain about. Now for the taste test. I'm gonna cut off a little piece of the point from there. I'll do the same over here. And then we'll get a piece of the flat, get a little bit of the juice that's dripped off onto it. We'll do the same over here. Okay, let's taste the flat first. Great piece of brisket, no complaints. You've got that smoke flavor that's really penetrated the beef here. Really nice spiciness from the black pepper and the seasoning of the salt and that rub. Really, really nice flavor profile. Not the juiciest, but we'll try this one. To be honest, even though that brisket was the one that had the injection and that the flat was appearing to be a little bit overdone on the bend test, that actually tasted a little bit chewier to me. I want to go in, maybe get a thinner piece here just to make sure I didn't miss something on that. There we go. Maybe I just had a thick piece. Now you're really noticing the difference in the tenderness there. Excellent. Really, really good. Now we're gonna go in for the point. That's like butter. And now I'll do the point on the other brisket. Really, really good. So here's how I'm gonna come down on this. The difference between these two briskets, I think in part had to do with a difference in the evenness of the briskets. So the one that we didn't inject, I think that one actually had a little bit thicker of a flat. So the ratio of thickness of flat to the point was a little bit higher or greater than the one where we did inject. And you saw that because we had to get this brisket to 203 before the point was actually probe tender. So the point on this one, absolutely incredible. It's like butter, done perfectly, super juicy and tender. And that's one of the best briskets we've done over this entire brisket series. So in my opinion, if you have the time for the injection, go for it. It's not gonna be a huge difference. You know, you or I, because we really like grilling, you'll probably notice it, but to the average person, you're probably not gonna distinguish the difference. So there you have it. This is the last of our brisket experiments in this 6-part series. If you haven't watched the rest of the series, we've got a link over here. We've tested whether you should do the fat cap up or down, hot and fast versus low and slow, whether to inject or not, whether to trim your brisket or not. We've got a bunch of different really popular hypotheses around how you should actually smoke a brisket, and we just really enjoyed putting all those to the test. So if you like this video, consider giving it a like below, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks for tuning in.